Welcome to Recogs, the show where we learn how the world's best business operators build consumer brands from sourcing to selling, brought to you by Manufactured. This is a replay of a live webinar we did on March 7th, 2024, and we're chatting about successful scaling from D2C to wholesale distribution if you are a rising natural food brand. It was a pleasure hosting Cody Berenson from City Capital and also Chris Carter from Porter Road. Enjoy. Thanks, everyone, for joining this webinar. From clicks to bricks, successful scaling from D2C to wholesale distribution to retail for rising natural food brands. I'm your MC. My name is Mike. I'm the community manager here at Manufactured. Before we get started, I'm going to tell you a little bit about Manufactured. Promise it will be brief. Manufactured is inventory success platform for consumer brands of all types. Now, what is an inventory success platform? Our goal is to help brands extend their runway by offering inventory financing and lowering their COGS by digging into their supply chain and seeing how we can help improve their margins, either by counter-sourcing, looking into other manufacturers in our 700 plus manufacturing network, or even help on the logistics side of things. So if you're ever in need when it comes to exploring ways how you can lower COGS for your business, or if you're interested in like inventory financing, let's say you have a PO and you need that, you need financing for that PO, for example, we're more than happy to. I'm more than happy to talk, and so happy to chat with you. I am so excited. Okay, so we have Chris Carter here, who is the co-founder and CEO of Porter Road, and we're gonna get into what Porter Road is. And we have Cody Berenson, who is the VP of Services at City Capital. City Capital. On my other podcast, I interviewed Melissa, who she is fantastic and awesome. We had Cody here on a previous webinar that brought down the house. People really loved it. And we've also had Chris as on our Recogs podcast, and that was like an awesome episode, hearing his story about how he's building Porter Road. I'm gonna do brief intros. I'm gonna have each of you introduce yourselves really briefly. Chris, we'll start with you. Tell us a little bit about you and Porter Road.
Yeah, we're in Nashville, Tennessee, or just north of Nashville right now. We started as a brick and mortar butcher shop in 2011, small, only sourcing local meat, trying to solve two issues. One is that we couldn't buy fresh local meat in the city of Nashville because there was nobody that was bringing that to it. And then also really focusing on building a farmer-friendly platform that would give local farmers that were doing things the right way the outlet to be able to have a partner that could sell their meat fresh, where before that we were chasing farmers down at farmers markets or going to their house buying often poorly butchered meat frozen in a leaky vac sealed bag out of a deep freezer in a barn somewhere on their property. And it led us to consistently asking the same questions, like, why can't I buy this fresh? And it was a consistent answer. It's that the market's just not built to support small local agriculture that way. It's built where a lot of these farmers were either raising animals to a yearling weight and then selling them off at a sell barn or working with a broker and then selling them to the larger industry where they would be shipped out west. And Netflix or Washington Post or anything can tell you the rest of those stories. And so where we really stepped in is we stepped into those farmers that were doing that and said, hey, keep these animals on pasture their entire lives, no antibiotics, no hormones, raise a better animal, raise it outside, raise it naturally, bringing life back to the earth, and we'll buy the entire animal from you, but we'll do that at a predetermined price that will not fluctuate with the Chicago stock market. So you'll always know what you're going to get for that head of beef. And it gave those farmers the ability to actually forecast or project their businesses like the rest of us try to do. And by creating that system, we had farmers that were wanting to do things correctly, that wanted to join our program, which gave us access to the highest quality meats possible. 2014, we wanted to control more of that supply chain. We wanted to be able to look our customers in the eye across the counter and tell them that we knew how that animal was raised, where it came from, just full level of transparency. And then we also wanted to tell them that we knew it was humanely harvested, and who was doing the actual work. And we couldn't do that without actually owning that. So we went and bought a small abattoir in Western Kentucky, which was located right in the center of all the farms that we were working with. I could literally take the rest of the day and tell you interesting stories about owning a small slaughterhouse in rural Kentucky. Um, and we, myself and James came from chef background, so we really take like that focus towards everything, that process and cleanliness, and what does this look like at the end of when it lands on the center of the plate. It's all about the cooking experience, about the customer's experience. So James and I really focus heavily on the high quality of butchering and the size of the meat and making sure that everything's ready for the grill or ready to go in the oven. um, and we refined those processes in a very proprietary way, the way that we butcher and look at an animal. We butcher through scene butchery, so yielding all sorts of steaks that you wouldn't see on any other market, like the Merlot or the volcano shank or the dino rib, really figuring out how to best utilize that animal. And we did that originally at the butcher shop in order to run a profitable butcher shop. And then as we continued to scale through the slaughterhouse, it became more and more important. 2015, we launched a wholesale business. So using our chef background, I'm going to sneak in the back door of every restaurant in Nashville and offer a fresh, truly local product with 100% transparency. That business grew extremely fast. We went from 0 accounts to like 180 accounts, almost 200 accounts in like a 3-month period. And James and I were running that business, the slaughterhouse, and the butcher shop. So we hired in some account managers, delivery drivers to kind of take over the wholesale business. It was really kind of running itself just because of the quality of the product and what we could offer, where I was able to step back and look at like, how do we continue to support our farmers? How do we continue to spread this across the country, engaging agriculture? Um, and we had some concepts around like small slaughterhouses and a bunch of brick and mortar butcher shops. Had a mild panic attack thinking about managing that many people. And so turned to the computer, right? And I started to see companies that were, of course, there's Omaha Steaks that really like, started everything as far as like mail order meat. And then there was a couple other companies that were kind of popping up, and I would look at those companies and realize that we had a much different approach where we were actually touching our product on a regular basis that gave us the ability to really differentiate the way that we looked at our direct consumer market. So we launched with a la carte. We're already asking you to go to your computer and buy meat. So not subscription only, not large bulk order only. If you want 2 ribeyes, buy 2 ribeyes. You want bacon, whatever it is, you could go on, build your own cart, and then we would ship that out of our facility fresh, never frozen, because we're doing the cutting, the processing right there. So steaks and things of that nature have never seen the freezer. Um, we do freeze like grinds, so ground beef, things like that, sausages, larger cuts like briskets and pork butts, because they don't degrade the quality of those meats because of the way that you're cooking them from the frozen to thaw. Um, and then we had to figure this last one out, but we got it. We nailed it with some good partnerships. But we were going to ship it all in a recyclable, compostable, biodegradable container. And we would never have shipped frozen meat in a styrofoam container. Like there's just nothing interesting or great about that. And from our chef mindsets, we knew quality was what was going to win out at the end of the day. And we launched porterroad.com in 2018, consumer facing, and just been a uphill battle since then. Ended up working with the Industrial Development, Economic Development of Western Kentucky. They showed us great support from Mitch McConnell's office, Macomber, Governor Beshear, all across the state, writing letters of recommendation for us. The local industrial development actually ended up buying a 30,000 square foot production facility for us, which we moved into in 2021. And since then, we've just been trying to kind of figure things out and really grow and scale, but really focused on infrastructure and foundation over the last couple of years, and just showing us that, going into retail is the next big move for us. And I can keep on going, or you can cut me off.
No, that's awesome, Chris. That's awesome. Thanks so much for giving us like an overview and also talking a bit as well about like the different distribution channels that you're or sales channels that you're currently in and kind of the evolution of how you got to DC um and why also like timing perspective. Well, I want to get into timing perspective as well. Why retail now, but we're gonna get there in a little bit.
That's what I figured.
Um,
That's what I stopped.
uh, uh, Cody, tell us a bit about City Capital and as well as like the services side. Obviously that kind of you lead and manage. And as well as you know how you're kind of helping brands with their operations. I've like texted like a couple brands that are in their portfolio or like that you know you guys work with, and I literally
Yeah.
like, oh yeah, like if I have like any ops questions about them, like dude, like literally Cody runs my ops. So like just like go to Cody if you want to like ask anything. So anyway, take it away, Cody.
Thanks, Mike, and excited to be on again. Pretty awesome. So yeah, I'm Cody. I run operations at City Capital. Quick rundown on City Capital. We are a growth equity investor in the food and beverage and food tech space. We invest in brands that are kind of better for the earth, better for you, innovative products. And yeah, we're always looking to learn more about new brands that are coming out. In terms of the operating, I know that's kind of the big focus of today. So yeah, I run the operating team at City. And City historically, before we were a capital firm, was a company called City Ops, which specialized in growing and scaling early and growth stage CPG brands. And ops is one of those topics that, you know, if you know about it, you know about it. And if you don't, you don't. And it's not
And if you
always.
don't, you know, and if you don't, you don't really want to know about it, right?
Yeah, and I think too, a lot of founders, and I'm sure Chris can attest to this, he kind of mentioned it, right? Like, it's hard, right, to scale a business. It's hard to know kind of the right moves to make if you're focused on your product or marketing your product or selling your product. A lot of the ability to succeed, right, and have a great business requires really fantastic back end operations. So that's where we come in. I have a team of 8. We operate all like we all kind of come from fast growing brands in CPG and pet and beauty and food and beverage. And we basically apply that to brands that are in our portfolio that we're invested in, and also brands that are not, and brands that we just have an interest in or we may want to invest in the future. Just in terms of quickly on our services we offer. So we work across kind of all channels, all product types, all sales channels. I know we're talking about D2C and retail today, and really kind of implement ourselves and kind of tailor how we work with each brand in terms of their needs, and bring that expertise kind of day in and day out.
Awesome. Thanks so much, both of you, for like a roundup about, you know, Porter Road and also City. This is great. And I just want to add too, everyone that's listening live, because I know this is going to be also repurposed to our podcast. If you do have questions, like please feel free to ask them. We want to make this as helpful, as interactive as possible. And so please don't, there's no dumb questions whatsoever. So please feel free to ask them. And hopefully we can answer them. So I want to start with you, Chris. You started off with Porter Road. You started off as a butcher shop. You expanded into a wholesale business, into restaurant. And then you went D2C. Why did you decide to go D2C first, over into try to actually get into make a run at, you know, grocery on like a widespread basis? Why was it first like the D2C channel, like that opportunity? I know I mean, I say first. I know it wasn't first. You obviously had the butchery, and then you also had, you know, the restaurant. But why did you decide then that it was D2C and not like it into pushing into a grocery?
Yeah. And just to say, like, we've always been operators. Like, we started as operators, right? We've always been focused on the operation. We've always been focused on refining and improving that process, right? And so, and we did that through the brick and mortar butcher shop, then owning our own harvesting house. And we had, when working in the butcher shop in Nashville, we've had a big like turnover, I guess you could say, of like the neighborhood is very different where the shop is in East Nashville from when we opened and we were running around banks in our $60 suits trying to get a loan to open a butcher shop in East Nashville, and every single person being like, that's a terrible idea. And now you can't buy a house in that area for like less than $700,000, and it needs work.
Wow.
And so like our original clientele and consumers that lived in that area, we saw a lot of them move on. And we would get letters and phone calls. We'd build like real relationships with people. And we get letters and phone calls from these customers. And they're like, hey, man, like, I moved to Toccoa, Washington, and, there's a butcher shop up here, but it just doesn't, they don't have the same brats, like bacon. Like, I miss your bacon. I miss your steaks. Like, I'll pay for the shipping. Would you guys send me something? And James and I were very much on our high horses. We laugh about this because we were like, no, this is local meat for local people. Like, if you're not in Nashville. And
you got to come down here to Nashville and pick it up yourself.
Right. We had a lot of that. So we'd always kind of thought about like if we had that opportunity to really ship, like that would be really cool. And then it became, a very real option for us as we were growing and understanding that we could produce a lot more out of our little 6,500 square foot building that we were working in at the time. And we wanted to figure out how we could, support as much growth for our farmers and ranchers in that area. And I mean, there's no way to I guess well, it sounds stupid, to expose yourself to as many consumers as possible other than, going to the internet. And, it gives us the opportunity to touch as many households and, as we possibly can.
That's the most like organic go D2C I've ever heard. Like you were getting letters in the mail, like, hey, we missed your steaks. And you're like, great, let's start a D2C business. That's amazing. Like that's like so opposite of a lot of brands that we work with where, they're like, we just want to start online, right? It's going to be easier or whatever, right? Just like that's how they want to go. But you're like, you just naturally got pulled into it, which is a unique experience and very cool.
We've always just been one foot in front of the other, right? Like if a door opens, stick your head in it and you maybe walk all the way in. Sometimes you run out of the door because you're like, oh, it was a bad move. But for us, and we didn't understand anything about it. I'm talking about like we're in rural Kentucky when we hired a guy that we really consider our third founder, Ryan McIntyre, who joined us after one meeting in a very hot coffee shop in New York, where he thought I was mad at him or I didn't like him, but I just couldn't move because otherwise I would start like profusely sweating. But he hears the story. The authenticity of what James and I have built can't be replicated on a whiteboard, right? Like we truly have these relationships. I mean, if you go on porterroad.com, we love the video. Our farmer is not such a big fan of it, but you can see Joey, one of our main producers, starts getting teared up when he talks about, the first time that we met. And I do too, because the first time we met, he brought his son Alex in, who was like 7 years old or something like that at the time. Now he's like 6'3". And the conversation started with Joey saying, Alex, this is Chris and James. These are the guys that are going to make sure that you have a farm to farm when you're my age. And I was like, could not be a better reason. And so like we took that authenticity, we brought in Ryan. Ryan knew how to work computers, came from, digital marketing background and worked with a couple startups. And then and then it just kind of went from there. We shipped some meat to JD over at Red Antler, and he was like, "We want to work with you guys. We'll build your website and do your rebranding and everything." And it was just like this whirlwind. And I often will go back and look at my phone at like pictures of 2017, and I'll just be like, "Man, that was a lot happening at that time." So it's and then it's just been trying to kind of figure it out from there. And there's a difference between growth and sustainable growth, and that 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 thought right there is exactly why we are now going to retail. I'll stop there because I'm sure you'll have a question that'll lead into that.
Yes. Well, first of all, like and that was awesome, Cody. Like in terms of pointing that out, in terms of why Chris you started D2C. as a way to scale beyond restaurant and obviously beyond, the butcher shop in Nashville. You kind of got pulled into it because you got all these letters. Okay, how can we actually fulfill these orders? How can we actually get this meat that is desired to these different locations around the country? So you actually don't need to, not that you didn't need to, but you didn't need to actually go to retailers and try to get your product in store right then and there because you already had demand in different places around the country. That okay, how can we build a compelling D2C business since there seems to be an opportunity?
I mean, we had people that were driving to the butcher shop on Saturdays. I remember this woman, Carmen, and she had these other two friends that would ride with her. And she would come over from, she was either in Chattanooga or Johnson City, which is like, no matter what, it's 2.5 hour drive, 3 hour drive. And they'd come in with their uh, little igloo coolers and they'd buy their product and load them up and drive back. We had people who were coming from West Tennessee. And then we were getting written up in major food publications from Food and Wine to Bon Appetit to Garden and Gun and Forbes 30 under 30. Like all this stuff was just happening. And it was like, we created something that people care about. And that's what Porter Road has always done from the beginning, is created that story and that authenticity to connect us emotionally to what we're eating, know where your food comes from. And it creates a better experience. James has a great saying, which I like to say as well, but it's, every meal should be an event, right? When we gather as a family and there's that meal that's in the middle of the table, and if people know where it came from, that becomes the topic of conversation. And it's, we've had a lot of organic growth due to, just being able to tell those stories. And I think the website really, I mean, I love it. I think that it gives us the same experience digitally that we would give somebody if they came to the butcher shop in 2014.
Yeah, Mike, I think too, one like thought that's coming to my mind is that that's something that's very unique about D2C, right? And when you own a brick and mortar shop is like that ability to do storytelling, right? And I think when brands, as Chris is also talking about, going to, a Whole Foods or a Safeway or wherever, right? Is that sometimes can be lost on top of all the other things that take to do it. So I think it's cool to hear you talk about it, Chris, because I think it's easier if you get the word out, right? And you build kind of this brand loyalty, which it sounds like you have tremendous brand loyalty, right? Like through your store and D2C and like telling the story that when people are shopping, right? Like they see it, right? They already have a connection or they heard of it, right? Or they can go to your awesome website. So I don't know. It's cool like to hear that you kind of have this already built-in loyalty and you're not just going to pop up on shelves, in a way that matters.
And that's one of our big approaches, right? And I think it could be our superpower, is that we've run this direct consumer business for 6 years. And so working with retailers to be able to know, a heat map of where our customers live, how often they shop, what they're buying, what's their consistency to buy, and then being able to, communicate with those consumers, because we have a post-purchase survey and 58% of our consumers they say the reason why they don't shop with Porter Road every time is because they're shopping just for today. And so our approach to retail is to have those products in that retail shop in those local locations, and then let our consumers that are shopping online know that, like, hey, if you run out of ground beef, it's available at your local Kroger or, Harps or whatever, wherever you are in the country. And we can use, zip saturation marketing with pair coupons. Like these are all the kind of things that we're currently kicking around as we're rolling out this retail strategy.
Well, I mean, yeah, that makes a ton of sense. I'd love to like hear, Cody, like a bit of like your perspective when it comes to the first part of this conversation around D2C and why the overall perspective from your standpoint about the D2C channel as it relates to food CPG, how you think as an operator about that channel.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think we all know, right, when COVID began, D2C boomed, right? And businesses became, very large very quickly, with folks, just more of the country, right, more of the world having to buy things online. So I think that there was kind of this boom period in D2C. And it sounds like, Chris, maybe you were a part of that timeline too, maybe naturally, but just like things really ramped up, right? You see, brands that are only sold online grow to be 50, $100 million in annual revenue really quickly, which is awesome. And kind of this, it became very on trend to be in D2C in the world we're living in. I think too, just when I look at like kind of the landscape now, is it is harder, right? And I think the things that Chris is talking about in terms of creating brand loyalty, having economics behind it that work, that's harder to do now than it was. I also think some of the updates that occurred on iOS and Facebook around advertising, the advertising to gain customers, the customer acquisition cost is much higher than it used to be, and to kind of keep those customers. So I think you have to have a really strong brand to be in D2C overall, Mike. And I think that, prior to that, right, there was a lot of people, and there still are some folks, right, that have a product, right, that may not be super differentiated or may not have the story behind it. And there's this kind of perception that still exists a little bit that's like, hey, I'm just going to launch online, right? And I'm going to grow this thing. And I think that it's much more complicated than that. And I think really on the ops side, there's a lot of things that are really nice about being a direct to consumer business. I think first from a capital standpoint, you can go from order to cash for that order instantly, right? As soon as someone buys and pays for your order, that money is going to hit your account, right? And that's a really nice thing to have a short kind of thing like that. Other things that are really nice about D2C is it's kind of like tech in the sense where you can do as many updates as you want, right? If Chris, for example, wants to do a new cut every week, he can do that, right? You can adapt your business and react to your customers instantly, right? And there's not a lot of limitations in terms of what you can and can't do on D2C. It's kind of a free-for-all, and like, may the best man win, right? In terms of how you're offering your product, how you're pricing your product, and having the right infrastructure, right? From making your product to getting it to customers' doors. If you do all those things really well and you have good economics behind it, you can have a fantastic D2C business. So that's kind of my quick thoughts on D2C. And I think it's a lot more complicated when you go to retail, which we can dive into whenever you're ready, Mike.
Yeah, I know. Go for it.
Sorry. Yeah, just the point of COVID, right? Like we launched 2018. We didn't know that COVID was going to happen. We didn't know that. I didn't. Maybe somebody on my team did. I'm just joking. But you see all these D2C brands, like you're saying, they just exploded, right? Where we were working out of a 6,500 square foot building that had been around since 1950, and we will never know how big our business could have actually scaled during that period, because we've always stayed true to the core values of Porter Road. Like if we were ordering boxes of meat from the industry, cutting them and repackaging them, we could have sailed. But we were still supporting local agriculture. We were bringing in whole animals. Now, not to say that every single thing that populated the website sold immediately. We also built in special access for like frontline people, so people that are working in hospitals, things like that, so that they could get first pick on those things. But we would be just constantly sold out on the website, which created our wait list. And so you think about like a take number at your butcher shop, it would basically say, do you want to join the wait list? And as soon as those SKUs were scanned in and populated Shopify, they were wrong. And it's always been, it is a quick cash conversion cycle for about 70% of our SKUs. The other 30% is why we're going to retail.
Yeah, and I think one thing that we've noticed a lot, like in the last couple of years, as D2C has kind of cooled a little bit, is that there's a lot of businesses that have successful D2C businesses, whether they're selling $10 million a year on D2C channel, 20, 50, right? And the revenue is obviously a great marker, right? But the economics behind that revenue are getting more and more challenging, where, you may have a $50 million a year D2C business and millions of followers on your Instagram page, and you're getting thousands and thousands of orders a day, but you're losing money on that channel, right? And I think that Mike and Chris, is a key thing, right? Why you may want to expand, because if you're burning money on D2C, it's great, right? And you can look at it as a marketing platform. There's so many great things, right? You need to have an online presence, but in terms of kind of building a profitable or break even business at this point, D2C is not always that. And I would say that's for a lot of brands out there that we work with. If you are right making money on D2C, that's freaking awesome, right? More power to you, and keep diving into it. But I think that ratio, right, and that kind of ability to make it work is more challenging than it's ever been.
Yeah. I mean, we've been really fortunate for, to build a brand with great customer loyalty. I mean, we've got, 60% repeat rates, primarily focused on an a la carte business and a cohort waterfall that looks like a subscription business. And, CAC's, sub 30.
Nice.
And so, I mean, we don't expect it to always stay that way. But yeah, it's just been, the D2C, but we have such a fixed cost, right? So we are very much an industry or a business that is really rewarded by scale. And so, again, one of the things and what's pushing us to that scale is the efforts that we're putting into retail ready products.
So talk to me a little bit about Chris, how you think about retail ready products, and as well as what products do you think would work in retail, for example, and also how you and also there's also a question for Cody as well, but how you all think about margin profile when it comes to like food brands in general. Maybe that's more of a question for Cody, but we'll start with you, Chris, in terms of how you think about what type of products. So know that you can do a number of different cuts that you obviously offer, and as well as obviously the beef sticks too. How do you think about what actually makes sense and what's going to sell in retail?
So this is the evolution of our business, right? D2C, venture backed. We spent money on marketing. We scaled a direct to consumer business, right? And we were burning cash, but that's the plan. You go for top line revenue, you get a valuation, you do a fundraise. Well, that doesn't always work out. And so as we've been assessing our business, as we've been building in these disciplines, this rigor that we have today, building out our own, we can't afford a fully baked ERP system, so we had to create one, right? And it lives in Google Sheets right now, but it's very proprietary to the way that we run our business, telling us weeks of supply per cut and how we should cut each animal every day. And it's, I could go deep into that, but what we've learned is that when we launched, again, up and to the right, that was our growth pattern. But as we scaled, there's a very important ratio in this industry that you have to understand. And we primarily look at beef. Beef is king. Like, you can't run a butcher shop without beef. So I'll speak just primarily to beef, which makes up about 65, 70% of our business, maybe higher. And the ratio is for every 8 pounds of tenderloin, I'm going to get 270 pounds, 300 pounds of trim. So if I run that trim through a grinder, I get ground beef. But for me to assume that I can sell 270 pounds of ground beef for every 8 pounds of filet through direct to consumer it's just not going to happen, right? So we can sell every ribeye, strip, tenderloin, bavette, picanha, skirt steak through the D2C platform. Of course, they're rounding out those carts with ground products like ground beef, hot dogs, snack sticks, sausages, things of that nature. And that's great, but it doesn't really level off. And so where we focus on our retail growth is with added value products. So if we take 1 packs of pasture raised, no antibiotic, no hormone, dry aged ground beef, raised and made in the USA, to a retailer, which we use a co-packer for that so that we can have their BRCs and their SQFs and everything that the retailer needs, and a great packaging without investing in brickers and all of that stuff. Then we've got that product that we can now push through a retailer, but then taking that same ground beef, sending it to some of it to the same co-packer, some of it to another co-packer, and converting it into a hot dog. Now we're just walking up that value chain for that same product by adding value to it. Snack sticks, again, walking up that value chain. And so our approach into retail comes from exactly that. And it's snack sticks into, stores across the country, hot dogs. Our hot dog was the first retail ready product we rolled out because it is such a differentiator in the market. You could pick a Porter Road hot dog out of a lineup of 100 different hot dogs. I would say 80% of people think that's a good thing. 20% are like, no, it's not a hot dog for me. It's like, yeah, you're more of a this hot dog. But now focused on that approach into retail, right? So approaching the utilization of the byproduct first, then turning on marketing to support the growth of the direct consumer business is a path to profitability and actually being able to utilize and sell through the entirety of the animal. And it's something we've been kind of shifting gears back into over the last 2 years as we've built the foundation. We've moved into the larger facility. We've been building the infrastructure. And now it's build a focus on retail and then, engage more consumers on the direct consumer piece. So it's just a one foot in front of the other, right?
Chris, it kind of reminds me of your D2C story a little bit from the beginning of the call. Like you're seeing a gap in your business where you can like utilize which would be waste or like kind of different outputs, right? That like don't add up. And you're like, oh, we could do a wholesale business with this because it makes sense. And the customers could do it. And thing that's sticking out to me too is like the products you're talking about bringing to retail are like very kind of like C-store mainstream products like ground beef or hot dogs, right? Which is an interesting play. Like however you got there, right? Like I get the strategy. So that's super interesting. Are you feeling good about like your margin profile for those to go to retail and stuff? Or like what are you thinking?
So that's the entirety of the focus, right? It's the way we make decisions, data-driven decisions today is very different from when we were in a 6,500 square foot, building where we were just like, you can pick your head up and be like, you're doing that wrong. Well, now we could fit 2 of those buildings on our production floor. And so, it's about everything is about making margin accretive decisions. So what is the best outlet for that product? And then over that is that I always say that we get rewarded with the high quality and the flavor. And, and I cannot believe I did not bring snack sticks to have on this desk right now to be like.
One thing too, to like kind of dig a layer deeper, how we look at things on the city side in terms of what Chris is talking about looking at his margin and all that is that, there's just a fundamental operating switch when you go from D2C to brick and mortar retail. There's a whole kind of other way of operating. And like we talked about, like there's so many things about D2C that are very agile and you can just move very quickly. And I think when you're moving into a retail standpoint, I mean, there's just so many different things between, there's just so many different partners. You may need a new warehouse. You may need a new co-man, like Chris was talking about with like different ways of packing his product that's retail acceptable. Different freight carriers. Do you want your product to be picked up by the distributor that's then taking it to the store, or do you want to be responsible for delivering it to the retailer or the distributor's door? Totally different systems too. I don't know. I don't want to get too ops nerdy on everyone, but EDI, SPS Commerce, is that going to sync to your accounting and to your ERP system? Do you have an ERP system? Yeah, Chris is shaking his head. We got to talk about that offline, man. Like we can chat it over, but I'm just throwing out some things, right? Where it's like the way you can scale a really awesome D2C business, everything becomes very slow with wholesale. You can't just change your product every week, right? It may take you, if you're selling your products through KeHE to Sprouts or something, you may say, hey, we want a price change, right? Like we looked at our margins again and they might say, hey, that's going to be in 3 to 6 months, right? You got to kind of deal with that until they come around, or we're going to, we can't get you in for 6 months because we're doing a reset then.
Yep.
So I think those are all the things, right? That there's so many other kind of operating factors and brand factors when you're going to retail that are just very unique. And if you're just in D2C, it can be very shocking and very capital intensive in a very different kind of way than you run in kind of a D2C business that can be very organic feeling at times.
Yeah. I mean,
Go ahead, Mike.
sorry, I think
go for it.
okay. I think that what you're kind of getting into is like, where we are today, right? And that's the strategy, right? So there's a local grocer in our market, turnip truck. So we can deliver directly to their stores on our wholesale trucks that are hitting food service industry, and they perform incredibly well because everybody's familiar with the brand. Those stores are located, in neighborhoods that don't want to come to the butcher shop, or it's a Sunday or Monday when the butcher shop is closed, or they didn't place their order. So it gives them access to that product. And then, our kind of approach right now is really a shotgun approach. So we've got a big retailer that we're going to be doing a test with, and we're going to be doing direct to store. So we're going to be building a DSD program in order to service that product. And like I don't come from this industry, right? So like all of this, the retail industry, I don't come from any of it. I've learned all of it along the way, but resets and things like that. Like I'm calling somebody that I know that works at a retailer, and I'm like, hey man, we got these great hot dogs. Let me bring them into you and put them on the shelf. And they're like, oh, it's 6 months. We got to do a planogram. And I'm like, that's not a real word. Like, what's a planogram? And then finding out, like, luckily we have a guy on our team, Nick Michelle, that comes from, the retail industry, and he's brought a ton of knowledge and can talk the game. I mean, we just signed up with Range Me last week because they're running a special, because that's how I think of things. Like, oh, that's really expensive. Oh, you can let me pay for it monthly? Okay, yeah. And so now we're out there kind of speed dating and putting our information out. We also work with US Foods Direct, which has been really, really interesting because it gives anybody across the country access to come in and place an order, and then we ship it to them. And it's crazy to see the people that are, merchandising Porter Road products, like, a golf course in, middle of Wisconsin, or, a museum like gift shop in, upstate New York. And it's really cool to see like how people attach that and continue to place those orders to like US Foods. And for us, it's just continuing to collect data, and really build that go-to-market strategy. But we've looked at like KeHE's and stuff like that, and we have a very different approach as well, because we are creating the raw product that is the largest expense for what we're going to market with. And so I can actually take a sheet and know exactly what my costs are. And then I can work with the retailer and say, okay, what margin do you want?
Yeah.
Oh, we want 20%. Okay. You take 20% off that number. All right. How are we doing on, how's it getting there? Okay. We have to deliver it to there. Okay. That's an FOB price. Also a new term. I don't know what it means, but I use it a lot.
Yes.
I know what it means.
I
don't know what the acronym stands for, but
right on board.
like that doesn't make any sense. But anyway, okay.
Just say FOB. That everyone will know what you're talking about.
Yeah, or we could use the word delivered. Those are
Chris, I like what you're saying about like each individual distributor and each person you're working with, because I think back to Mike's question on like margin and stuff.
Right. Exactly.
Like
That's right.
With D2C, like your margin's kind of the same with every customer, right? There may be ad spend to acquire that customer, and every order more or less kind of looks the same. Maybe like if you're shipping a bigger box, right? Usually the more dollars a customer spends, the better your margin is, generally because of freight or shipping charges or like picking. I think that's one thing that's really unique to call out, right? With each distributor relationship is that each one's going to be unique. And I think, especially in this climate where cash is really hard to come by in fundraising, right? Like there's not a lot of checks being written right now for a lot of brands. And I think having relationships that are beneficial to the retailer, and also to yourself, right? And I think a big thing we see a lot with a lot of brands is they'll start working with, you know, a lot of different distributors and be in a lot of different doors. And the capital intensity of that can become very real once the allure of like, hey, I'm in Sprouts, right? That's awesome, right? If that's a good account for you and like you're going to move product. But just because you're in a store doesn't necessarily mean that that's going to be a good thing for
sell
your
through.
business.
Yeah.
Yeah, you might not sell through. It may not be profitable and you're, you know, losing cash on it. They may ask you to do a promotional plan that you can't afford or support. You know, it's just, it's much more complicated. So I think taking it on a case by case basis and doing what's really right for your business is so crucial outside of just being trapped by the idea of like, hey, we're in Sprouts. Like, could be good, could not be good, depending on your business.
And we have actually,
Go for it.
we actually have like a decision tree that we go down in order to see, we call it, is the juice worth the squeeze, right? And if there's an opportunity to get a foot in a door with a retailer that potentially could lead to more product. And you know, it's like if I send my raw materials to a co-packer, if I send 1 pound of meat to be turned into hot dogs to the retailer, or no, to the co-packer, it costs me $2,000 in trucking cost or whatever it is round trip. If I send 20,000 pounds on one of our trucks, now the price comes down. And so it's, again, it's about growing into scale, and it's something that's really rewarded by scale. But we'll build out a P&L for each and every retailer that we work with, and what that product is that we're you know, and we'll have line items in there for promotionals and things like that. Like, we really do want to approach each one of those relationships as a relationship, as a partnership with that individual retailer. And I think it really gives us a superpower to kind of, you know, be very flexible. I mean, you want a different packaging? Our branding's in-house. We, you know, Jeremy, they want to see a bag and they want a smaller size. We get together, we have a session, he knocks it out in like 3 days somehow, gets it back to us, and we put it back in the front of the retailer. And they're like, we'd like to go to market with that. Now you can wait 6 months while we do our resets and our planograms.
Yeah, I think also what I think is interesting that we kind of touched on, but what I've heard is really challenging is, you know, since there's so many food brands that are kind of starting off D2C, and you know, in some ways they have to do it because maybe they just can't get into retail day one. I know, like Chris, like your trajectory is a bit unique in that you kind of had the pull to go into D2C from there, and you were already in restaurants. But on the pricing side, there's a lot more, as you kind of pointed out, Cody. There's a lot more kind of control that you can do with D2C. Okay, are we spending too much on marketing? Okay, maybe let's like shut off marketing or bring it down and like see what happens, right? There's these kind of levers you can pull to kind of play with it to see how sales will do. And in retail, and you can kind of price to that. In retail, it's really tough because first of all, you have to look at like what the competitive set is. It's not just like your page, right? So you got to make sure that you're kind of like you got to think about it from like a buyer's perspective. Oh, like they're going to be comparing my product to other products, you know, out on shelf in that area, or maybe in the freezer or in the fridge. We got to make sure that we're not like, you know, if we are really expensive, then there has to be like a really maybe reason why on our packaging or in our story, right? But we also can't be too expensive. But and at the same time, you also have to take into account that we kind of alluded to, like distributor costs, right? And obviously like slotting fees, making sure that you're maybe like merchandised properly. You know, are there going to be promotions? Are we going to do sampling, for example? Like what are kind of like the different ways to kind of engage? Those are also going to be costly that are kind of beyond your control. And I think that when I talk to some people, what can be tough is when you start off D2C, and that price that you have on D2C that actually maybe works for D2C, it might not always work for retail, right? It might be actually your pricing actually might be quite different to retail. I mean, obviously, like your from a margin perspective and what you're getting is less, but at the same time, it's a lot more volume, right? Because it's a wholesale business versus a direct consumer business. But you have to take into account all these different costs that you're associated with to make sure it even makes sense. And then, of course, knock on wood, you sell through, you know?
Yeah.
So yeah. Anyway.
Yeah. You just named like 50 things that need to go right to be successful. And it's true though, and it's not to discourage folks either, too, right? Like it is possible. I think a lot of the same like core values that make a D2C brand successful make a retail brand successful. Like you got to have a great product, you got to have a great story, you got to have a great mission. I just think the amount of things that need to occur behind the scenes to do it, from team, from tech, from partnerships, and I think understanding your financials and having a really good sense of your unit economics, from beginning to end for the specific channel that you're working in is just pivotal. And I think, you know, Chris was hitting on it, right? Like he brought people onto his team that are really good at this. And I think that outside of some of the technical stuff we talk about, Mike, and like, you know, slotting and these things, like being a founder, and if you don't have experience in this, it's really important that you surround yourself and just get super smart on this stuff. Listen to your podcast, right? Like there's a lot that goes into it on the front of the house, the marketing, the back of the house to make all this kind of come together. And it's super complicated. And there's a lot of like just like very small things from that everyone's kind of out to get you, in a sense. Like, you know, there's lawsuits going on with UNFI, for example, who's like the largest natural foods distributor, and they're being sued, right? Because people aren't getting paid for some of their things. And like, you kind of have to work with UNFI, right? So it's a big business, it's complicated, and getting really smart on it and really understanding like where your business can handle that and how much capital it's going to take. And I think the last thing I'll say just on this point is the cash cycle is really long, right? So I think as you're looking at your cash balance and stuff, right, to fulfill distributor orders, the lead time from when you need to build your inventory and spend money on whether it's raw materials, in Chris's place, animals, the packaging, right? That needs to happen much farther out, for you to get paid for all of that work. With D2C, right, you could make that product the week before, the day before, ship it out 3 days later and get the money in your account. KE UNFI, that could be 90 days, 120 days of you kind of going into production for your product and then eventually getting paid for an order. And I think that can be very shocking to a D2C brand that's never experienced kind of that order to cash cycle being like 10 times longer in some cases. And if you can't support that, right, that can be a very traumatizing experience for brands if they aren't in that position.
And of course, yeah. I just wanted to quickly add, just as a plug, and of course, when you do run into those situations, you can certainly utilize manufactured and obviously our inventory financing. So anyway, quick plug.
I love that.
Chris,
Yes.
Over to you, Chris.
I was gonna plug that.
Oh no! Go for it.
What Mike said. But there's also, you know, and I mentioned this earlier, like sustainable growth, right? It can't, for us, like it can't be just like a switch we flip, right? Like if Walmart said, "Hey, we want to put snack sticks in every single location in the country," like that would be a bite where we would choke, right? Like we just the scale of that, and then trying to grow the direct to consumer business to support that would be too much. So for us, taking like a very like, even though it is a shotgun approach of how we are, you know, coming into it, it still is kind of it's a honed in, right? It's more of a smaller market. You know, we're in a test market now, but as we start going, like we can grow pretty quickly, but there's only so much growth you can take on before, you know, you get over your skis and you're like, I can't fulfill the order. Oh, that vendor never works with you again, or that, you know, retailer never works with you again. But we don't want to find ourselves in that. So it's very much a calculated kind of growth that we're looking at, over, you know, the course of the year, which is we only want to grow our retail line item of revenue like 2,000% this year. So that's achievable.
only 2,000%. Only 2,000%.
Yeah. We'll get there.
100%. 100%. Well, we have we have one question here from an anonymous attendee. I know, Cody, that you're on the like op side more thing for City Capital, but what is City Capital's check size for the growth equity investment?
Ooh, good
Did I send
question.
the question in?
So we have kind of we have a scout fund, right? That's going to write smaller checks for earlier stage brands. For growth equity, I think just super high level, we're looking at brands that are $10+ million in revenue annually, at minimum. And those check sizes generally are at least a couple $1,000,000, and go up from there. I can't really give more info on that. But yeah, we're looking for kind of high flyers, and we're willing to deploy capital, for kind of a large lifetime value too, if we see significant growth.
And you're one of the few that are still deploying. Wonderful. In this current market, which is awesome.
And your inbox just filled up.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, no.
Exactly.
Oh no. I should have given that question to you, Chris.
They're done. They've deployed their entire fund.
They're done. Don't bother.
They just invested in this incredible meat company.
Well, this is awesome. I know that I think we're just out of time here. Since I'm on my end in LA, the clock struck 12. But Chris and Cody, this has been so much fun. We're gonna be repurposing this as well for a podcast in case you weren't able to join us live. But thank you both so much for your time. I really appreciate it. This was a lot of fun.
Also, maybe we'll do a part 2.
Let's do it.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thanks so much, Mike and Chris. Great to hang out with you for an hour.
Yeah, great to meet you. Look forward to staying in touch.
Sounds good. All right. Cheers, everyone. Bye.
Thanks, guys.
And there you have it. It was such a pleasure having Cody and Chris on together. Really, really appreciate it. And I hope that conversation was helpful. If you enjoyed this webinar and want to hear it again or replay a part that you missed, you can find recasts of our webcasts on our website and also on our YouTube channel. Be sure to like and subscribe and get alerts whenever there's new content available.